This would not be an exaggeration, but I have to say I was shocked to see some of you for communion. No, I mean, I was really shocked. It hurt. So, were you guys not getting zapped? Oh my goodness. Some bolts of lightning. Gotta get a little more humidity in there. We're starting a new message series this morning, Healthy Christian Habits. And you might want to think of it a little bit like a New Year's resolution type message series. And you might be thinking, but we're like January 19th. Why are you just now starting a New Year's resolution type message series? And the answer is because we break resolutions. So I figured I'd wait till you broke your existing ones before we added some new ones. I don't know how many of you did make New Year's resolutions this year, but that practice of making New Year's resolutions is actually 4,000 years old. It goes back to the Babylonian times, and they didn't do it in January. It was having to do with their spring harvest of barley. Statistically, though, 38.5% of you made some resolutions this year. 59% of you made resolutions if you're younger. And get this, if you're 55 or older, you were 3.1 less times likely to make a resolution than the younger people, because by the time we get older, we know it doesn't matter anyways. Because in the end, only 9% of all resolutions are kept. 23% quit after the first week. And by the second Friday in January, it's the official quit date. So most of us in here have already quitted. The top 5 resolutions that people normally make resolutions are about to exercise more, to eat healthier, to lose weight, to save money, and to improve health. Now, what's interesting about all the different resolutions is what's missing is there's no religious component to it. And so what the series is going to do is for the next several weeks, we're going to be taking a look at some different religious components, some different religious resolutions that we should make that would do well to help us in the new year. And as we're going to kick off the series, we're going to kick it off with this one. We want to be resolute about obeying the 4th commandment. And some of you are like, wait, which one is that? Well, it's up there on the screen for you. It's remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And you may wonder why I'm kicking it off with this commandment. And the reality is because I'm extremely practical. And let me tell you about this commandment. Every second of every minute of every hour and of every day is impacted by this commandment. Every second of every minute of every hour of every day is impacted by that commandment. It will impact you physically, it will impact you emotionally, and it will impact you spiritually. Another reason that I picked it is because it's the oldest of all the commandments. And this isn't going to be a message series on the 10 commandments. It's just we're starting with the 4th one. But that is the oldest of the 10 commandments. And you're thinking, wait, what do you mean? They're all given at the same time. You're right, they were. But this commandment, remember the Sabbath day, actually is rooted in the very foundations of God's creation of the earth. And the third reason why I'm starting with this commandment is because it is a gift of God to you. And I'll say more about that, but we don't think of this commandment as being a gift, but it is a gift of God. Now, I want you to think, how many times have you heard a sermon on remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy? And chances are you may not have ever heard it preached on before. I'm trying to think, the 26 years that I've been preaching and teaching, maybe I've only preached 1 or 2 sermons on this because it's not talked about. It's not talked about because if we're going to be really honest, we don't really have 10 commandments, we have 9. This is one of the ones that is just kind of dropped off, and you don't hear it talked in church. It's not really observed in Christians' lives. You don't see really evidence of it in the world, but it didn't used to be that way. Now, I will agree that of the 10 commandments, it really, from the time of Christ on, a lot of people have kind of minimized this one, but especially in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, we've especially seen it. Because it used to be, even in the secular world, you would see observance of the Sabbath day. If you're older like me, you probably remember the blue laws. And the blue laws were laws that were created out of reverence to, out of respect to the fourth commandment, that we're to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. When I was a kid, you couldn't go to the mall on Sundays. Malls would be closed. I know that there's not many malls even left nowadays, but to think of it maybe more, in modern terms, like stores wouldn't be open. Many restaurants wouldn't be open because people weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath day. My aunt and uncle had a hotel on the Gulf Coast of Florida. My cousin had his own hotel on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and they would basically they would at least close the office on the Sabbath. Now think about that. You have a hotel on the Gulf Coast, and they're Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm going to get into the difference in how they see the Sabbath and the rest of Christians. But so they would celebrate their Sabbath on Saturday. But can you imagine having your office closed at a hotel, a business on the Gulf Coast on a Saturday, probably the busiest day of the week for a hotel on the Gulf Coast in Florida? There would be no one in the office, but if an emergency came up, there would be a way to contact them. I don't know how they handled when people were trying to check in. Maybe back in that day, it was just an envelope with a key in it. If people checked out, maybe it was just processed then the next day. But we do actually see some remnants of that even to this day. Think about Chick-fil-A. You can't go there for lunch, can you? And think about how crazy and how profound that is, that a fast food restaurant would be closed 1 out of 7 days. How much income are they losing by being closed? Think about Hobby Lobby. They do the same thing. Now, if you're going to close during a certain day of the week, you might as well close on Monday or another day that people are at work, because you're not going to get as much business. But to be closed on a Sunday when people are off and when they could make it into the store, that's quite a commitment. Even here in Texas, beyond that, we still have some remnants of the blue laws. If you want to buy a new car, you can't go both Saturday and Sunday. That dealership is required by law to not sell cars on either Saturday or Sunday. They can't be open both days. It's a holdover to those blue laws. If you're wanting liquor because you need it because your team lost yesterday, or they're losing today, you cannot go to the liquor store and buy liquor on Sunday. It's a holdover to these Sabbath laws. Now, what is the Sabbath? And where does it come from? Well, it comes from creation, honestly. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but on the seventh day it's to be a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, not your son or daughter, not male or female servant, not even your animals, not even foreigners that are living in your towns." Focus specifically on this. "Because in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. He made the sea and everything in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So I said this command is rooted in the foundations of God's creation at the beginning of time. Now, for the Jews, the Sabbath was always Saturday. But it's not just Saturday. It's basically from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. Now, I want you to consider how intrusive this command is if we were to follow it the way that the Jews followed it in Jesus' day, and how many Jews still follow it today, or at least your more Orthodox religious Jews. Can you imagine from when you get off work on Friday? You don't go out Friday night. You don't go out for dinner. You don't go out to the bar with the guys. You don't go out and do anything. Saturday morning, you don't get up and mow the yard. You don't go do activities with your kids, sports. You don't go out, take them on the lake water skiing. It's a day of rest and a day of worship. Think if that was your Friday night and your Saturday, how fundamentally different your life would be. Now, Christians, though, what Christians have done is they have changed the Sabbath, if you will, from Saturday to Sunday. And I really don't want to get into like all the details of that, but let me just say it kind of works like this. Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday, so very early in the early church, it became custom that they didn't gather on Saturday to worship. They gathered on Sunday to worship because they were remembering that Jesus rose from the dead. And so as they gathered on Sunday to worship, then this whole concept of rest, of the Sabbath rest, that kind of became part of Sunday as well. So what happens is it starts like from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, you do nothing other than worship and rest, basically, in your devotion to God. To now Christians have moved it to a Sunday. To now, in our day and age, if we were even to know that term Sabbath, even if we were to refer to it, you would probably be speaking about just going to church for an hour or two on Sunday, and it wouldn't extend beyond that. Like we've whittled down Friday night to Saturday night to just an hour or two on Sunday. That would be kind of like whittling down the commandment, thou shalt not kill, to just on Wednesdays. Right? But that is what we've done with the Sabbath. So in essence, we don't have 10 commandments anymore. We just kind of have 9 and an 8. So let me ask you, how are you going to celebrate your Sabbath today? Some of you are going to be watching playoffs and you're going to be cussing because your team is losing. You're going to be yelling because your team is losing. Some of you are going to be overeating and overdrinking as you celebrate your Sabbath. Some of you, your team's already knocked out or you're sick of football anyways, and so you're going to celebrate the Sabbath by, celebrating materialism, going shopping. Some of you are really behind everything that you need to do in the week, so you're going to do laundry and you're going to clean the house and maybe you're going to meal prep for the rest of the week. How are you going to remember this command? And the question that we've got to ask ourselves is, does it matter? Because I think modern Christians are basically of the mindset, this one doesn't matter. The other 9, they still matter. This one, not so much. But I'm here to tell you it does matter, and here's why it matters. Because it is the one commandment it's got the most serious offense if you break it. If you break, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain, Scripture says God will not hold anyone blameless who does that. But you know what God says to those who break the Sabbath? The punishment is death. Look at Exodus 35:2. For 6 days, work is to be done. But the 7th day shall be a holy day. It's a day of Sabbath rest to the Lord. For whoever does any work on it will be put to death. And here's the deal. For those who want to say that this command it doesn't matter anymore, I've got a problem with that because there's 10 commands. And that is the most serious and the most significant of the punishments of breaking it, is being put to death. You can't convince me that something that was such a big deal in the Old Testament that you'd be put to death just doesn't matter to God anymore in the New Testament. And what some people try to say is, they try to say, well, Jesus basically says it doesn't matter. That's not what Jesus says. It's not true. Let's look at what Jesus says about the commands of God. Look at Matthew 5:17-19. Jesus says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I haven't come to abolish them, but I've come to fulfill them. He says, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of the commands, we're not even just talking the 10 commandments, but anyone who sets aside one of the least of the commands or teaches others to set them aside, they will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I said people try to say that Jesus basically said this one doesn't matter anymore, but what you just heard me say is that's not what Jesus says. He says that none of them disappear. He said he's come to fulfill them, but they're still commanded to be observed and to be followed. And whoever doesn't, you're going to be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Here's where people get confused about what Jesus does for the Sabbath, is he does it for every command, is Jesus clarifies commands for us. In general, as people, ignorant people, we tend to miss the point. And so Jesus would explain the commands to the people, what they really meant. For instance, when it came to adultery, people are like, I haven't committed adultery, I haven't done this or that. And Jesus says, really now? Have you ever looked at someone lustfully? Well, I tell you, you've heard it said, but I tell you, he says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery. And then he explains murder. And people are like, I've never murdered someone. He's really? And Jesus says, you've heard it said this, but I tell you, if you look at someone with hate in your heart, if you say to someone, you fool, you've already committed murder. What he does is he re-clarifies what the commands are really meant to teach us and to call us to follow. And this is what he does with the fourth commandment about remembering the Sabbath day. And on a couple different occasions, Jesus is accused of breaking this commandment, and Jesus says, in fact, that he hasn't broken it because we too oftentimes misunderstand the commandment. Look at Luke 14, 1-6. Now on one Sabbath, Jesus went to eat at the house of a prominent Pharisee, and they were watching Jesus carefully. Now there in front of Jesus, there was a man that was suffering of abnormal swelling in his body. And Jesus turned and he asked the Pharisees, the ones who were the experts of the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? But they had nothing to say. They couldn't answer it. So taking hold of the man, he healed him, he sent him on his way. Then he turned and he asked the religious leaders, he said, if one of you has a child, if one of you have an ox that falls into the well on a Sabbath, will you not immediately pull it out? And then they had nothing to say. What Jesus didn't say is he didn't say the Sabbath doesn't matter anymore. He didn't say that there's only 9 commandments rather than 10. What he says is this, is don't allow the commandments of God to keep you from doing what is good and what is right. And if that is helping someone, if that is healing someone, if that is caring for someone who's sick, or whatever that need is, then it is good and it is right for you to do it, even if it is on the Sabbath. Jesus was later accused on another occasion of breaking the Sabbath when he and his disciples were walking through a field and his disciples started picking grain and eating it, which was forbidden on the Sabbath. Look at Mark chapter 2, 23-28. Now, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? And Jesus answered, have you never heard what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, David and his companions, he entered the house of God, and he ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And then he also gave some to his companions. And then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so the Son of Man is even Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying this, like the Sabbath isn't there that somehow you please God by obeying the Sabbath. The Sabbath was given as a gift for you. It was given for your benefit. So if it comes to healing, then heal someone. If it comes to helping someone, help someone who's hurting. And if you're hungry, go ahead and eat, because if the Sabbath is made for you and you're not for the Sabbath, how is the Sabbath helping you if you're having to go hungry because you can't eat? Here's what I want to challenge you when it comes to this command, and this is why I'm teaching it to you today, is that when we look at society, we can all agree that society is pretty messed up. And you know why it's pretty messed up? Because there's one command that no one follows. Can you imagine if no one followed thou shalt not murder or thou shalt not steal or the other commandments? Can you imagine how messed up the world would be? This is one of the legitimate 10 commandments, and as a society, we don't follow it. And so here you are sitting here today, you know your life has dysfunction. You know your family's got dysfunction. You know your relationships have dysfunction. You know your work has dysfunction. You know your city has dysfunction. You know this, like there's dysfunction everywhere, and it is because there's one of the 10 commandments that we don't follow at all. And I'm here to tell you that every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day is impacted by whether or not we follow this commandment. So what are some practical ways that we keep and can keep the Sabbath? The first is this, is you got to remember that there is a Sabbath. I'm guessing some of you, like, if someone said to you before this message, what are you doing on the Sabbath? You might just look at them like they're weird. You wouldn't even know what they're talking about. You got to keep it. You got to realize that God calls for us to keep it, that it's important. I hate to admit this, but sometimes on Friday evenings, like, there's nothing going on and there's nothing on TV. And so I turn on, like, the Jewish television network. Because for a Jew, their Sabbath starts on Friday evening and it goes to Saturday evening. And so they broadcast these Sabbath services out of New York City. And I'm fascinated by them, primarily because of just how important the Sabbath is. The speakers up front will say, Shabbat Shalom, like Sabbath peace is what they're saying. It's a greeting, and it will be responded back to them. When it's time for people to greet and shake, they encourage each other with these words. This word Sabbath is integral to their life and to their community and to the religious community. And if they follow what it is that they believe, 1 out of 7 days is set apart to God. Every Sunday, as I'm finishing my announcements, I sit here and say, so not to distract, please make sure that your phones are on vibrate. If your kids get fussy, take them out. On the service I watched a couple weeks ago, he basically said, the leader, out of celebration and out of respect of the Sabbath, if your kids this, please take them. Make sure your phone's this, because they respect the Sabbath. And they understand what it means to keep it holy. When I was in seminary, I catered at a Jewish catering company, and we would sometimes cater a meal that was on the Sabbath. Maybe it was at someone's house where they were celebrating a festival or feast, or maybe it was a funeral and they were having the life celebration on their Sabbath. You weren't allowed to cook on the Sabbath, so if we were serving their food, it was all already prepared, and we would just get it and we would serve it, because they honored and respected the Sabbath so much. You don't even cook on that day, you cook ahead of time. And yet for us, like, we whittle it down into maybe an hour every Sunday, maybe an hour every couple Sundays, maybe an hour one Sunday a month. Remember, we're called to keep the Sabbath. Secondly, the Sabbath commemorates who God is and who you are. Look at Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens. In 6 days the Lord made the earth, he made the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and he made it holy. You see, when we remember the Sabbath day, we remember who God is. You didn't come as a result of evolution. You didn't come as a product of chance or all of these different things we're taught. When we gather to celebrate the Sabbath, we remember that in 6 days God created. We remember who God is, and we remember and know who we are, his creation. You see, God will use things like that point us to a greater meaning or greater understanding. In that bread and in that wine, we're told, do this in remembrance of the fact that Jesus is on the cross. When Noah left that ark and God was promising that there would no longer be a flood, it wasn't just a promise. He put a rainbow in the sky, and that rainbow would forever be a reminder, pointing them to the fact that God promised that he would never destroy the earth with floodwaters again. When we celebrate the Sabbath, it is a reminder of who God is and who you are, not only for you, but for your children and for your children's children. Third thing, ask yourself, how does your Sunday look different than your Saturday? If the answer is on Saturday I get drunk and on Sunday I'm hungover, you're missing the point. If your answer is, on Sunday I go to church for an hour, but otherwise my Sundays and Saturdays look the same, you're missing the point. The point is this, is the Sabbath should be fundamentally different on that day than any other day. Your Sundays must look different than your Saturdays. Fourth point, remember the Sabbath is a gift. I've said that multiple times. The Sabbath is a gift. How do we know it's a gift? Because Jesus says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God made the Sabbath for you. It's a gift he offers, like the gift of Jesus Christ. He offers us grace in Jesus Christ. He offers us forgiveness of sins, and you'd be stupid not to receive that gift. So in the Sabbath, God offers you a gift. And I'm here to tell you this, like if you offer someone a gift and they refuse a gift, that's rude. But yet many of us refuse the gift of the Sabbath. What is the gift that God offers? Well, first and foremost, to be rested. Wouldn't it be nice to be rested? Wouldn't it be nice to wake up Sunday or Monday morning to go into your week and think, you know what? I am fully rested. Sabbath is about the gift of rest. It's also about the gift of being firmly footed and firmly rooted to be able to take whatever's going to come your way for the rest of the week. When you don't take time to rest on the Sabbath and on Sunday, then I'm here to tell you, you're already in a bad mood when your alarm goes off on Monday. You're already cussing out people as you're driving on the road to get to work on Monday. You're already sick of the job on Monday. You're already sick of the family when you get home on Monday. You're already sick of the pets. You're already sick of all these different things. Why? Because you've entered into the week without the rest. You're not on a firm footing. And now little thing that's going to happen throughout the week is going to set you off. Why? Because you haven't received the gift of rest and you haven't received the gift of being in a firm footing to take on all the junk that's going to be thrown at you throughout the week. And the third reason it's a gift, and it's why it's a gift, is because when we receive the gift of the Sabbath, it will strengthen you to resist the attacks of Satan. And I'm here to tell you, Satan is real. And his attacks are real. And he's going to know when you're prepared and when you're ready and when you're strong and when you're not. And when you don't receive the gift of the Sabbath, you won't. And I can assure you, he's going to attack. The Sabbath ultimately is about two things. It's about rest and holiness. Let me talk about both of those. First, it's about rest. We have to have adequate rest. All of us do. They tell us we're supposed to sleep 8 hours a night. I think I slept 2 or 3 last night. On a good night, maybe I sleep 6. But what study after study after study shows is people who get 8 hours of sleep, their immune system's going to operate better. They're going to be healthier. They're going to live longer. Why? Because God's made us so that we need rest. Not only has he made us that we need rest, animals need rest. And back in the days, if you had oxen, or if you had, horses, or whatever your animals are that you're using for the farm or whatever you're doing, like they have to get their rest. Not only do we need rest, not only do animals need rest, but land needs rest. That's why in the Bible we see that every 7 years the Jews were forbidden to plow that field. It had to rest. Why? So that over the course of that year, no nutrients would be sucked from that piece of dirt. That as the wind blows, it blows dirt and elements and nutrients from other places, and it will settle on that field. When the rains come and floods take place, it will wash nutrients into the field. The things that grow on the field will then be plowed back into the ground and be turned back into nutrients, because people need rest, and animals need rest, and fields need rest. When I was in high school and playing sports, when we got to playoff time, sometimes you had to travel long distances here in Texas for where that playoff game was. And on a couple of occasions, we would go and spend a night at a place, and the game would be the next day. Why do you think the coach would always say there's going to be a curfew? Because he knows that if you get your rest, you stand a chance of playing better the next day. I did some academic type, competitions too when I was in high school. I remember one being down in San Antonio, and I remember having a curfew. Why did we get curfews? Because they knew that our brains would be operating best if we got rest. And so when we ignore the Sabbath, your life is not going to be great throughout the week. If you're ignoring the Sabbath, week after week, month after month, year after year, you're going to become vulnerable, not only vulnerable physically, you're going to become vulnerable emotionally, you're going to become vulnerable spiritually, and Satan is going to have his way with you. Because God's created man, animal, and land to need rest. The Sabbath is about holiness. Now, what does it mean to be holy? It means to be set apart. To be different than all the others. And so as we're called to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple different things. It means that when you go and you talk to your coworker tomorrow and you say, hey, what did you do this weekend? And they tell you, well, on Friday after work I did this, on Saturday I did this, and on Sunday I did this. Your Sunday ought to look different than their Sunday, especially if they're not a Christian. Why? Because you're called to be holy as God is holy. Holy means to be set apart. It means to be different. Is your Sunday different than your coworker who doesn't go to church or even believe? Is your Sunday different than theirs? You're called to be holy. The other part of holiness is this, is that we're called to come and to worship God. And as you not only worship him, but it's a day of prayer, it's a day of meditation, it's a day of maybe reading his word and so forth. And let me ask you, for those of you who are here today, how often does your Sabbath include holiness? How often do you come to church? Are you an every weeker? Are you an every other weeker? Are you a once a monther, once every 6 weeker? It was a beautiful thing with this worshiping online during COVID, right? It used to only be large churches that did online worship, but because of COVID, all churches of all different sizes began to do it and to do it well. And how nice it is, right, for us to be able to sit at home and to watch church. But I'm here to tell you, is that holiness? A God who calls us to come before him and to bow down and to worship him, to gather with other believers and to be a part of this worship experience and hearing the message proclaimed in many senses, I think, live stream can be a way in which Satan gets in the way of us fulfilling that holiness part of things. It starts with going to church. And then what are you going to do with the rest of your Sabbath day? 2 last points. The day that we celebrate the Sabbath is not as important as that we celebrate the Sabbath. Let me say that again. The day in which we celebrate the Sabbath is not as important as that we do celebrate it. So for Seventh-day Adventists, these are, they're Christians, but they believe the rest of Christianity is under the spell of the devil. It's a sign of the devil because Christianity basically celebrates their Sabbath on Sunday. I'm here to say if that's what you believe, then you worship a day. And you honor a day rather than God. God said that 6 days he worked and 1 day he rested so that we would do the same. I'm glad some people work on the Sabbath. I'm glad those firefighters in LA were working on the Sabbath when they're trying to put out those fires. When there's a war, I'm glad that the military is fighting on the Sabbath. If I have a heart attack in 10 minutes, I hope there's an ambulance driver working on the Sabbath and an emergency room doctor working on the Sabbath, right? We need people to be working at all times. Now, there's a lot of people working on the Sabbath that don't need to be working on the Sabbath. But even me as a pastor, what am I doing? I'm working on the Sabbath. I came in at 5 this morning. I've been working, and we'll work probably another hour beyond when you guys leave. This is a work day for me. So how do I handle the Sabbath? Well, all things being equal, Friday's my day that I don't work. I work 6 days. God says you work 6 days, you rest 1. The 1 day that I don't work are Fridays. Now, listen, if one of my donkeys fall into a pit, not that I'm calling you guys donkeys, right? Jesus says, listen, if one of your ox falls in a pit or your kid's you're going to help them out. If you have a major issue, I'll be there for you on Friday, but all things being equal, I'm not working on Friday. But then it's on Sunday that I kind of do the rest of my Sabbath, and that is keeping it holy because that is, for me, I worship as you guys worship, right? As I preach to you, I preach to myself. And so Sunday is a day in which I may work my job, but when I get home, I'm not going to go mow my yard. I'm not going to start tinkering in the garage and doing this and this and that. I try to basically just rest and relax. And if I have to work, right, then I'll wait until later in the evening, till a little bit closer to when it starts to get dark, and then I'll go do it because primarily I try to keep it as a day of rest and devotion, and Friday is my day of not physically working. And then my last point is this. Jesus says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. What does that mean? It means that Jesus will define for us what it means to follow any of these commands, including what it means to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Do you know that the Pharisees, they came up with basically 39 categories. 39 categories of forbidden activities to keep you from violating this. A pastor friend of mine that was 40 years before me talked about when he was in seminary in the Jewish community, the seminary is located in this Jewish community, and there'd be this old Jewish lady who called him over to screw in a light bulb because she didn't want to break the Sabbath. They came up with 39 different categories so as not to break that. Here's the deal, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm not saved by my ability to obey the Sabbath. I'm saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And he perfectly obeyed the Sabbath. He perfectly obeyed all of the different laws. And so for me, if it's just been a real busy week, I might mow my lawn on Sunday. I'm going to try not to. It's going to be my plan that I don't. I might have a busy week and I might have to work some on Friday when I try not to. In the end, if I end up breaking that, I break that because I'm relying on the blood of Jesus. But all things being equal, I understand and I appreciate the value of it, and I try not to. But in the end, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is for us, not for him. I encourage you, look at your church attendance. How good are you at obeying the Sabbath? Look at how you spend your Sundays and how you spend the rest of your day today and how you're going to spend your next Sunday, and how good are you at remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. And lastly, remember that the Sabbath is a gift. It's a gift from God. It's a gift of functionality. Don't you want your family to be more functional? Don't you want your relationships to be more functional? Don't you want your work to be more functional? Don't you want functionality? Sabbath is about functionality. It's about rest. Don't you want to feel rested? It's about holiness. Do you not want to be holy? And ultimately, it's about protection from the attacks of the evil one. And don't you want to be protected from the attacks of the evil one? Would you join me in a word of prayer? Gracious Almighty God, we just thank and praise you for this morning, to be able to come into, to kick this series off on different habits and different things that we can do to have a more blessed life in this new year. This is one that we don't talk about. It's one that many of us haven't thought about, but I pray that it would weigh heavily in our hearts, that we would look at how we work, we would look at how we spend our Sabbath day, our Sunday, our day of rest, and that we would seek to honor you and to obey you in this command, even as we do and try the other 9. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.